connection, disconnection, and reconnection. So this is a cycle that couples will go through continuously in relationships, and you may be in one phase of this for a much longer period than another. You don't exercise only at the times that you feel gross. It's that same principle. Our relationships always need work. If sex and relationships were easy and they just happened, you and I would not be talking, I would not have a job, I would not have a full practice, I'd not be turning away people. In what contexts? Where are you experiencing pleasure as you've just described? That's right.
People want to be strong so that people invest in them.
What is it that I have to do in order to experience that thing?
It's difficult to understand where the pelvic floor is.
Hello, Catriona. Thank you so much for being here. We have done something similar in the past before, and it was so well received. And so I was so keen to have you on the show, on the podcast, and share more of what you know. So thank you for being here.
Oh, it's always such a pleasure to be engaged with you, Taz. It's always such fun, and I'm really happy to be able to share what I know with you a little bit more today.
So today I want to get into relationships, a little bit of sexuality, intimacy, a topic that I love to talk about, and I don't always feel like we speak about it enough in our communities. So first of all, do you agree with what I'm saying, that it's not something we speak about enough? And if so, why, especially around intimacy and sexuality, why is this a topic that is not so easily spoken about?
I mean, I 100% agree with you. Just because I am a sexologist doesn't mean I had enough conversations about this growing up. And I think from an intergenerational perspective, it just continues this shame passing on from one generation to the next, or anxiety passing on when we don't talk about it. I see it's quite bad in South Africa compared to the work that I do in the UK, but that's not to say that elsewhere in the world people aren't also feeling shame and anxiety around this conversation. I'll always say to people, it's so funny. It's a topic of our lives, of our well-being, that we all do, but no one wants to speak about it. Like, God forbid we should talk about it. So it's I think to do with that continuous intergenerational message or narrative around shame and anxiety that keeps getting passed down, that we feel like we can't go there and we can't speak about it, that gets people to hold back. But what we know from the research, what I can tell you from personal experience and what I know from my clients' experiences, when we do speak more openly about these topics, we actually are happier, we are more satisfied, we are better off overall.
That is something that I definitely want to circle back to, because yes, I think the shame around the topic and conditioning almost is such a wall that we have. So I do want to circle back to that. But before we get into that, what is the difference, if any, I don't know if I'm the only one who doesn't know, between sexuality and intimacy?
Oh, it's such a good question. And I ask all my clients that and go think about it for homework. It's interesting because if you were to ask some people, and I often will get this answer from people who identify as women, they don't really see a big difference between sexuality and intimacy. They see our sexual experiences as being part of intimacy. But if we're going to look at it as per definition, our sexuality encompasses so much. It encompasses our identity, our orientation, who we're attracted to, who we identify as. Whereas intimacy, I often think of as something that we experience. It's a place that we go to. It's a moment we share. So if we're going to think of it like that, then I can give you a clear-cut definition. But like I said, a lot of people generally are thinking about sex and intimacy in the same breath. But I would say that a lot of people also don't. And so they think that when they're being intimate, it's not, also when they think that when they're being sexual, it's not intimacy. And yet they're lacking other forms of intimacy in the relationship. So they're leaning just for sex. So I think it's a great question for you to ask me, for us to start off this conversation with, because so many people actually need clarity on that definition. So I turn that almost back on you and your listeners to say, well, what does intimacy mean to you, and how are you intimate in your romantic relationships or with your partners?
So essentially, intimacy is something that only happens with your sexual partners.
No, intimacy happens with your partner, okay? One partner, many partners, okay? You could be in a relationship with more than one person. So intimacy is happening between people. You can have an intimate moment between you and a friend. It doesn't have to be purely a romantic, intimate moment. Intimacy, if you want to break that down even further, we like to break it down as into me, you see. So you are gaining the ability to look deep into me. I'm giving you that privilege and that honor to see a part of me that I might be feeling vulnerable in sharing, or I'm feeling like I need to be cautious in sharing, but I'm sharing that with you and trusting that you will honor that, you will respect that. So whether that is emotional intimacy and explaining and exploring something you're feeling, or that's physical intimacy through touch, or that is spiritual intimacy that is shared between two people when they're connecting on topics of faith or any forms of spirituality, of mindfulness, of being, or even things like intellectual intimacy, having a really, really good quality in-depth intellectual conversation with your other half can be a form of intimacy. And as I said, that can happen with a friend. So we can have intimacy and go there between two people. But sexuality is just one part of the intimacy that we can create with somebody else.
That is honestly so interesting, and I've never known that. So I'm so glad I learned that today. So thank you. And then going back to what you were saying about the shame around conversations around sexuality, probably more, and then intimacy. I feel that a lot of us have grown up with a certain conditioning around sexuality. So this is in us. This is a belief system that we've grown up with, whether this is from a religious point of view or just maybe upbringing or whatever it is, or the conditions. And I believe this is what makes this topic, maybe people would even say taboo, some would say controversial, or just maybe an uncomfortable topic. So first of all, do you agree with that? And then if so, how do we take steps if we have decided as an individual we want to break through this belief system that is so deeply ingrained in us? How do we start taking steps which are not too overwhelming, but we can actually see results?
So yes, I absolutely agree with you. Again, that entrenched shame is all around us, and it comes from a lot of different sources. That can be from our faith, it can be from our families, it can be from our communities, our cultures. So there are a lot of different sources, unfortunately, that people are exposed to negative and upsetting messages about sex. But also, I have to say, the media doesn't help either. I was having a conversation with someone earlier today about their frustrations around the lack of accurate portrayal of sex in movies, and how when they started having sex, it didn't look like it looked in the movies. And so they felt that something was exponentially wrong with them versus there's something wrong with the media. So if you think about how much we're exposed to in terms of the messages around sex these days, a lot of those messages are unhelpful. A lot of those messages are not lending themselves to helping us foster a very sex positive mindset. And we need a sex positive mindset. We need really to be given permission around our sexual experiences and our sexuality, to explore our curiosities, because as humans, we are naturally curious. And we're not getting that. Nobody gives us that permission. Nobody says, hey, this is normal. Hey, this is okay. Hey, if you experience this, well, so did I. Nobody says that. Again, it's a topic we all go off and do it. No one wants to have a conversation about it. So yes, there's still the shame. And unfortunately, it can be very, very entrenched and very deep. And very often the clients I work with, it's predominantly about dismantling the shame that they experience according to their sexuality, but also the anxieties that are experienced according to what they think they should be doing or should look like, or all of the shoulds. And then to answer your second question, it can be extremely daunting, obviously, if there's a topic that causes you a lot of discomfort and emotional distress or discomfort, to go near that topic. So I'll always say to my clients, if you have a phobia of snakes, you are probably going to avoid any kind of material that is of a snake online, let alone in person. You're not going to go to a reptile park and things like that. And so it's the same with sex. If this topic is causing you an immense amount of discomfort and distress, you're probably going to avoid it. You may look at something online, but you may avoid having those conversations in person. So the very first place to start is with educating yourself, because what we have, unfortunately, is negative, unhelpful, and often unrealistic messages about sex that we've received from multiple different places that have set up our sexual blueprint or our sexual script, which, to be honest, is very often maladaptive. It's not helpful. It's not a good place for us to be in. So educating ourselves through reading, through listening to podcasts like this, through Instagram and following sex positive accounts, learning on platforms that actually put up accurate evidence-based information is such a great place to start. And it's a really comfortable place to start, because nobody has to know that you're doing it. Nobody has to know who you follow when you're on social media, when, even though you don't actually follow them, you might just check out their profile. Nobody has to know what podcast you listen to when you're in the car on your way to work or when you're walking on the treadmill at gym. So it can be a very private journey for you to start off taking, just educating yourself through learning and through different avenues of learning.
I think that's so helpful, and I'm actually just feeling so grateful in this moment that we have access to so much information now. I know that it's a bit tricky because it's not all good, but at least, yes, you can find a podcast or you can find a YouTube, and it is something that you can do privately if you're not feeling comfortable enough. So that's such a great place to start. And yeah, I just think it's great that we do have these resources now. And how do you spoke about the movies and what the movies are portraying. And I think that this is a major issue, because this is what we see and this is what we then expect. Okay, this is what sexuality, this is what good sexuality looks like. So how do we train our brain? I feel like when you see something visually, it's very easy to believe and accept that, and harder to talk yourself out of it. So how do we train ourselves to watch the movie but not fall into that space where we're actually judging our own lives or our own sexuality based on that narrative?
So I think that the very first place to start is by recognizing that what you experience is normal. Okay, it's normal for you. That's normal. That's your norm. So what you see on screen is not normal. That might be normal for the people on screen. There's a reason for it, but that's not your norm. People always ask me, am I normal? And I say, well, what is your experience? They'll tell me, I'll say, yeah, that's normal, because that's normal to you. And obviously, if an experience somebody's having is causing them distress, it's making them extremely upset, it's interrupting their ability to engage with their partner and have like a fulfilling sex life, then yeah, there's something we need to do about that. But everybody's experience that they're having, that's normal. What we're seeing in porn and movies and kind of represented on screen, for the most part, I don't want to kind of diss it all, because we've got some fantastic sources of mainstream media now portraying real sexual experiences, like Sex Education on Netflix. There's a show that's just been released on Netflix also called The Principles of Pleasure. Fantastic show. So I don't want to bash it all, but unfortunately, for the most part, I was saying to this person earlier, the average sexual encounter between two people is 6 minutes long. A movie is not going to show you 6 minutes worth of their screen time of a couple kind of like getting ready to have sex, instigating and initiating sex, getting lubricant out of their top drawer, cleaning up afterwards, I read such a wonderful meme the other day about a woman kind of cupping her vulva with her hand as she shuffles off to the bathroom if she's been with a man, because it's so 100% true. You're never going to see that in the movies, and you're never going to see that in porn, but that's what really happens. Now, the movies and porn, they're never going to show that. Why? Because that's not going to sell. And what we have to remember is that porn and the movies are actors. They are acting. They are specifically there to play out a scene that must look as good as possible. I mean, porn stars are hired based on the size of their genitals, and they film certain scenes first, like the orgasm scene, and they're not allowed to have an orgasm for a few days prior to shooting, and they will be paid to do things in pornography that I promise you most men don't really want done to them in real life, like having ejaculate all over their face. So the reality is that what you see is not real. It is acting. It is a fabrication of a real life experience. So I think that knowing you are normal, whatever your experience is the first thing I would say. And the second thing is understanding that what you see on screen for most of it, most part of it is fabricated and unrealistic. They're doing it for the pure purpose of entertainment. That is all it is.
Okay, I love that. That whatever it is, it's normal. I love that. It's so simple. Whatever you're into, however it happens, that's your normal. I love that shit. I think that just kind of helps you to just decompress already. You're just like, okay, it's fine. And there's so many dynamics going on. So you could be personally trying to work through your own, let's say you're trying to work through your own belief system around sexuality, but now you're in a relationship. It's a lot to manage. You're trying to manage your own perceptions around sexuality, and you're trying to make this relationship work. So just by even saying that, I feel overwhelmed. So how do we begin to have these conversations with our partner? And in fact, what I want to add to that is sometimes it's a charged topic. So how do we have good conversations, valuable conversations that don't end up in some kind of an argument or dismissal or something like that? How do we start that?
Oh, it's a lovely, lovely question. It's a question I get asked all the time because it's so daunting for people and for couples to navigate this area of the relationship. As I said, we're all doing it, but we're not speaking about it. So I think that it's so important to always start really small. If you've never had this conversation, think of it like learning a language. You're not going to go and learn, drastically long, eloquent sentences of a language. You're going to learn the absolute basics first and the foundations of it. So having a very, very entry-level conversation with your partner. And that can be as simple as saying something to them like, last night during sex when you did that, that was so good. Like, I love that. That can be the start of a very, gentle way into letting sex through the door as a topic of conversation. So using your own experiences to validate your partner, to validate the sex that you're having, just to kind of test the waters. Then using something like this podcast or an article you saw on Facebook or something you have pretended to see on Facebook, that's okay too. It's the only time I condone a little bit of lying in your relationships. Oh, I saw this article on Facebook earlier about like BDSM, that's bondage, dominance, and or discipline and sadomasochism. Kind of like, I don't want to say like 50 Shades of Grey stuff, but similar to the play you see in 50 Shades of Grey.
I feel like that is a whole podcast episode on its own, Catriona.
Whole podcast episode on its own, yes. So, saying to your partner, oh, I saw this article, or I read this book, 50 Shades of Grey, or let's watch the movie, and what did you think about it? So using it as context. So, oh, I listened to this podcast earlier, and on this podcast, Taz and Catriona were speaking about this. It was so interesting for me. Have you ever heard about this? No, I've never heard about it either. Starting off the conversation with context, okay? So great entry-level way is let's start just validating you about something we did last night that felt great that I'd like again, just to test the waters. Then why don't we introduce some topics through me saying, I read this, I saw this, let's watch that. What did you think about it? Curiosity is going to be your best friend when it comes to communication. But something that's massive is actually being able to turn towards your own discomfort about the topic, because we're sitting with it and we're sitting with the shame and we're sitting with the thought of what will they think about me if I ask about this? What will happen to our sexual relationship if I bring up the topic of sex? There's a need for you to actually face your own discomfort. We know, and I can show this to you just in one day of my practice with my clients, that whenever somebody turns towards the thing that makes them uncomfortable, you end up being less uncomfortable about it afterwards. So you have short-term discomfort for longer-term benefit. Whereas most people think, no, I'm not going to be able to cope with the way that I feel. So what you're actually doing there is you're avoiding a feeling. You're not necessarily avoiding the topic of conversation. It's how the topic of conversation makes you feel that you don't want to feel. I hope that makes sense, right? So
Completely.
You've got to turn towards the thing that makes you uncomfortable. And so if sex and the topic of sex does make you uncomfortable, as I've said in the question before, you need to educate yourself, learn a little bit, open up your horizons, expand them around the topic of sex, and then slowly but surely start introducing the topic into the relationship. So you don't want to dive straight into asking your partner to use a sex toy by bringing home the biggest purple, huge dildo you can possibly find. I would not recommend that. I would recommend saying, like, have you ever used a sex toy? And what do you think if we got one? And what would it be like for me to use one with you and you to use one on me? And, be curious, test the waters. And by doing that, you're also able to gauge where your partner's at in this conversation. But the more that we avoid it, the more discomfort we feel about it. So actually, try and turn towards it, trying to have these conversations. And I can vouch for this. I have very open conversations with my partner around sex. And that isn't because I'm a sexologist. That is because I'm a sexologist, I know the value of having these conversations. But we can talk about, I could walk out of here and go and talk to him about our sex life right now if I wanted to, because we've created the space that it's, I think finances cause us more distress talking about than sex in our relationship. So it's about creating the culture of comfort within your relationship to have these sorts of conversations.
And I'm thinking now, sometimes in a relationship, one of the partners, I'm going to say is, I don't want to use the word ahead of, but let's say one of the partners has decided, I'm going to start exploring sexuality. So that partner is obviously in the mind space. They want to have the conversations. They want this thing to improve. The other partner might not be there yet. So how do you manage this? Whichever partner you are, but let's say you're the one who's taking the action and maybe then you get shut down. What do you do now? Do you wait a bit? Do you try again? How do you manage something like that?
It's a really common dynamic that plays out, because what you will often have, much like what you will have when two people have sex, you're going to have one person who wanted sex first before the other person. It's the same with our sexuality and being curious. You're generally going to have one person who's got the curiosity, the other person doesn't know anything about it until it's raised. So it's water that you need to tread lightly at first, and again to gauge where your partner's at. If your partner totally shuts down when you say, hey, have you ever tried sex toys? It was something I was thinking maybe we could do. Again, be curious, ask them, so what happened for you when I asked that? Like, what went through your mind? Because a lot of people will often think that there's something wrong with them, or they're inadequate. I'm not good enough for you, or I'm not enough for you sexually. And that's why you want to bring somebody else in. That's why you want to bring a sex toy in. We personalize it very quickly when it comes to sex. It's a very vulnerable space, right? Not only physically, because, generally when we have sex, we're naked, but emotionally as well, because sex is all about letting go. It's all about being very present in the moment in order to allow yourself to experience the pleasures of that moment. So it's a very vulnerable space. And so when somebody else says, let's add something else in, or, I've been curious to try this, it can sometimes be triggering as a personal reflection on the other person, which I can tell you, it very rarely is. It's very, very rarely got anything to do with the other person, and got everything to do with that partner who's asking and their curiosity. So if you ask your partner to try something sexually, and again, you gauge the waters, you start slow, you kind of tread gently and slowly into this conversation. If they shut you down, ask them what's happening for them, and express to them that it is difficult for you to want to go. I suppose it's difficult for you to engage on a topic like this when you're wanting to engage on a topic like this, when it is an important part of the relationship. And if it keeps happening, if your partner keeps shutting you down, there is definitely something a lot more kind of in-depth going on there. And very often that may be related to what we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast, which is unhelpful and shameful messages about sex, or anxiety about sex. Your partner may be avoiding the way that talking about sex makes them feel. They may be feeling an immense amount of shame. So there is something happening there for them. Most human beings are innately curious, but again, this part of our identity has been so like boxed and shaped and molded into what society, religion, culture, family wants us to present it as, that we feel so much and so many difficult feelings when we are kind of presented with stepping outside of that mold.
And then let's say in your relationship, you actually get to the point where you are speaking about things and both partners are willing to speak about their desires, their expectations, their needs, and you find they are mismatched. Something interesting that I saw in Sex, Love and Goop was with a couple where they thought they were really different in terms of what they wanted, what turned them on, and it ended up they were actually the same. But I don't know if that always happens. So how do you then manage it when both parties are open about what they want, but these two things are not matching up?
I know what you're talking about. And I think that while I don't love what Ms. Paltrow puts out there into the world in terms of products based on scented vaginas and things like that, I do value what she was trying to do with that show and with those couples, because what the professionals in that show are trying to help those couples do is expand their sexual repertoire. I think when you've got one partner wanting X and another partner wanting A, it can sometimes feel so misaligned and so different, but you may be coming at it from a very limited definition. And so let's say you've got partner X wanting to try like a little bit of light bondage and discipline, a little bit of BDSM, and you've got partner A wanting to only start off with some sex on the couch instead of in the bedroom, like just a little bit of novelty, a little bit of difference, okay? Sometimes we can align their desires, their needs by, again, simply opening up and talking about it, but actually helping them to tap into different ways of creating sexual intimacy in their relationship. So often we want to try something, yes, because we're curious, but also because we feel like we need novelty, we need adventure, we need variety. I mean, it's the number one thing that couples say to me when they come to see me is, I'll say, what kind of sex would you like to be having? Standard answer, well, we want it spontaneous and we want it to be varied and we want it to be, like mysterious. And I say, cool, guys, I think I should refer you on because I don't know if I can help you get that, because what you're asking for, it's not that it's unobtainable, but you're speaking very much the kind of sex you probably had at the start of the relationship when you were getting to know each other. Once you've seen each other go to the loo and brush your teeth and fart on the couch while you're watching Netflix, I promise you the novelty around the passion that you're experiencing can wear off quite fast. So what we've got to do is try and get that couple who seem to have quite misaligned desires during sex to maybe just kind of step inwards a little bit, or step left or step right of their curiosities that they're interested to try, and just how can they expand their current sexual repertoire to include little bits of that and a little bit of this instead of fully that and fully this. So we're wanting to help people really, I think, expand their definition of what their experience of sex looks like more than anything. So it's not that two people who want two completely different things are mismatched necessarily. I'm not speaking, that's not always the case. That may sometimes be the case. But for most part, a lot of people are really curious and they want some novelty and they want something different and they want to feel very differently. And as you saw in that episode, yes, they may have seemed very different in their blueprints, but they were actually looking for the same thing. They were looking for reconnection and feeling that because they were so different, they were totally disconnected when they actually weren't.
Why do we naturally want novelty? Am I generalizing, or is that?
Of course. No, you're not generalizing, of course. I mean, look at all of us at the start of lockdown. We were on house party and we were FaceTiming and we were baking banana bread. And then like 1 year later, we were like, oh my God, I can't even bear the thought of another Zoom call. Novelty. Human beings, we like novelty. We like things that are exciting and that bring about a sense of exhilaration and apprehension, perhaps. We like that. It's natural human nature for a lot of people. It can cause a lot of people discomfort and anxiety, but for most people, novelty is exciting. And exciting means good things happening in the brain, makes us kind of open and willing to engage. So no, you're not generalizing at all. It's natural human nature to want things that are different and aren't always the same.
But then there's also beauty in certainty, right? And comfort and all of that. So I'm just thinking where those intersect.
Well, it's interesting because if you talk about satisfaction in couples, it's couples who've actually been together long term that report the highest levels of satisfaction.
Interesting.
It's surprising for a lot of people because they think, oh, well, but aren't couples who've just gotten together and are having like wild, passionate, exciting, novel sex, aren't they more satisfied? Well, actually, no. It's when intimacy develops, when we are allowing ourselves and that person to see into me, then something happens on a much deeper level. And then if we look at what makes up extraordinary sex, again, according to research studies, it's got nothing to do with novelty. It's got nothing to do with frequency and how often you have sex. But couples who report having extraordinary sex, self-reported, they speak about things like transcendence and mindfulness, like being present and expertly being able to communicate their needs to their partner and feeling heard, really feeling seen, and touching to really experience touch and being touched in order to really like feel and be touched. So extraordinary sex doesn't include novelty and variety and all of that. It actually is all about the ability to connect properly and deeply with another person.
So would you say essentially at some level that is what we're all searching for, whether it's conscious or not? That's what we're essentially going for?
Yes, I think so. I think the human psyche longs for connection. We know that. And again, the last 2 years have really shown us that we desperately want and seek out connection. And we actually rely on it. We rely on human connection. We know from some horrible studies done in the 1950s that babies who don't get touched or have any sort of human connection die. So we know how utterly important it is for our survival, and anybody who was on their own during, the length of lockdown will tell you how hard it was not to be touched by another human being for that long. So I absolutely think, yes, it's got a big part of it, but there's also the other part of us. There's the other part of us that wants mystery and wants adventure and wants novelty. And there's nothing wrong with both existing at the same time. But I think it's very difficult for a couple to suddenly introduce something novel into their sex life if there isn't a sense of security and safety that exists in their connection, and there isn't a culture in the relationship of kind of open and transparent communication around sex. So you can, couples will always say to me, oh, what's sex life? Oh, what's sex life? Couples will always say to me like, oh, we need a sex toy to spice up our sex life. And I'll recommend something, but I can guarantee you that's not going to fix any sexual problems. Sexual toys, sexual role play, kink, all of that stuff is a wonderful addition to the sex that you and your partner or partners can have without any bells and whistles.
You touched on mindfulness. So how, and I know that you are into mindfulness, so how can mindfulness help us in our relationship, not only sexually, and in our general relationship? And what are some of your best mindful techniques that people can easily introduce into their lives?
Oh, I mean, yeah, how much time do we have? It's one of my favorite topics. I use mindfulness extensively in the treatment of sexual difficulties because it brings us back into our bodies and out of our heads, where we spend so much time, unfortunately, worrying and stressing and experiencing shame. And again, the research is so abundant in this area. I have a whole podcast episode on it on my podcast, because it's just so monumental, the impact it can have. It allows us to refocus our attention to sensation. And that's the way that we use it in sex therapy, is getting people to actually experience sensation in their body. So pressure, texture, temperature, noticing those things rather than paying attention to thoughts like, are they noticing my cellulite? And do they think I'm good in bed? And oh my goodness, am I going to climax too quickly like I did last time? And I don't want them to know that I haven't had sex before, or whatever. So it helps to reshift and refocus our attention into our bodies, which is where we need to be during sex. So the way that I get people to install this into their sexual experiences is always first to practice it outside of sex. So to start a kind of really simple, basic mindfulness practice, you can use an app like Headspace or Calm. You can even do a simple exercise called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So sit in your chair by a window, or go and stand outside, or sit in the garden, and in your mind, name 5 things you can see, name 4 things you can hear or feel, name 3 things you can feel or hear, name 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And just doing that is a very simple mindfulness practice of just observing. Just observing my surroundings, because that's all that we want you to do. We just want you to observe. You're not trying to change it. You're not trying to judge it. You're not trying to make sense of it and explore it and expand on it in your mind. You're simply just wanting to observe. So using an app or doing the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is a great place to start learning a mindfulness technique. And it's not about if your brain gets distracted and starts thinking about, I don't know, your shopping list. It's about when your brain gets distracted. And we actually need you to be human and to have distractions, because that helps you practice bringing your mind back to what you were observing, whether that's your breath or sensation or the 5 things you're going to name around you. We are practicing bringing ourselves back to the present moment and doing that in a very gentle and compassionate way. That has been shown to be the most fundamental part of mindfulness practice, is the compassion that you show yourself, how gentle you are with yourself. So doing that outside of sex is the first thing that you need to do. Practicing it in the garden, practicing it when you make your cup of coffee in the morning, and you really, really, really pay attention to making that cup of coffee. I can tell you, and I'm guilty of this as well, none of us actually stop and enjoy the coffee. It's so perfunctory, just picking up the capsule and popping it in the thing and pressing it down and pushing the button, standing there rubbing our eyes. We don't notice the smell coming out of the cup, the noise coming out of the machine, the warmth heating up the cup. Just pay attention to those little things. And then bringing that into your sexual experience, it's actually very helpful to try and start that on your own first. So noticing what it feels like when you touch your arm, and the sensation and the pressure and the texture, trying to pay attention to that, and then noticing what it feels like when your partner does that. So step by step, much like with the conversation and things like that, gradual introduction into your sexual experience. But it's really all about paying attention with non-judgment, with curiosity and compassion to wherever it is you anchor your focus of attention, your breath, your sensation, your surroundings.
I loved that you just brought up that actually when your mind wanders, that's the opportunity for you to practice mindfulness. Because I know for myself personally, and I imagine other people, you feel like you're losing at mindfulness. You're not doing it correctly. Like you're trying to be the best at mindfulness, and now you're letting yourself down. So I loved the way you said, actually, that is the mindfulness, is the way you get the opportunity to bring yourself back. That really, really resonated with me. And then also, I found with myself, when I do practice mindfulness on the smallest things, like you said with coffee, like smelling coffee, it's almost so amazing that you don't even know what to do with yourself. Like sometimes I smell coffee and I want to like tell someone, or I don't even know what to do, because I'm like, this is so flipping cool. It's actually like unbelievable. So I definitely think, and another one that I found is like when washing your hands, to actually it's a weird thing. It really brings you into the moment. It's a very, very cool thing. So I really do hope that people add that in. And it's so easy. You have so many opportunities.
Do you know what I do a lot with my clients, right? So if I say the word pleasure, what does that make you think of when I say pleasure?
Like feeling good.
Mm-hmm.
You need more.
A little bit more, yeah. Feeling good's great. Come, Taz, give me a bit more.
Pleasure. Okay, I think of feelings. I imagine pleasure as like the feelings, these very sensory feelings. I think of relaxation. I think of it like being it could be heightened, but it's still, you're relaxed, like you're not tense. I get like imagery, I guess. I think of a body. I naturally think of a body when I think of pleasure. Are these the right answers?
No right or wrong. This is a very subjective answer. But my follow-up question to that is where do you get those feelings then? In what contexts? Where are you experiencing pleasure as you've just described it?
Okay, that's actually interesting, because then, I would say actually daily in things that are not at all sexual. They are, like for me, I can be doing a workout that is challenging but pleasurable. It can be so tough that I find it pleasurable. What I mean by so tough is it's that right balance of challenging, but you feel like you're doing a good thing. And then that's kind of pleasurable. Yeah, there's actually a lot of things. And then a lot of sensory things like smells and feelings of things. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you said, okay, hang on, actually, like you expanded your definition of it, because again, our definition of pleasure is so often very limited. And when I say pleasure, people go sex, or what we do sexually, or something relating to sex. A very simple exercise I get my clients to do is I get them to go away between sessions, and I ask them to go and find a food that they really love eating. Mine is a rusk. I love a rusk. There's nothing like a rusk. And I ask them to eat.
Dunked or dry?
A nut rusk?
I said dunked, like into coffee or something?
Absolutely dunked. Into coffee, yes. The coffee and the rusk, but don't give me a biscotti. I want a rusk. Yeah. So I get them to go away to choose a food, and it doesn't matter if it's chocolate or a peach or a rusk or, I don't know, a steak, whatever it is that they choose, but it's got to be something that they love, 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 love to eat. And I ask them to notice what happens when they eat it, but like slowly eat it and really pay attention to eating it. And the most beautiful thing happens for most of my clients, in the sense that they'll come back the following week and I'll ask them to give me a description. And the reason I'll ask you prompting questions like give me more is because I'm trying to get you to really, bring adjectives into this experience. When most people describe eating this food item, I'll say to them afterwards, it just sounds to me like you've had a sexual experience, right? The way you've just eroticized this rusk or this steak or this piece of chocolate, the way you are so enamored with it. And I can tell you that it is an insanely pleasurable experience for me to have a rusk with my coffee every day. I look forward to it. I get excited about it. I savor it. And it's not to say that sometimes I don't just like take it down and carry on my day, because I'm human. But if you actually stop and engage with pleasure around food mindfully, you suddenly realize that we pay so little attention to the things that bring us pleasure, food just being one of them. So I know that I just rush through dunking and eating my rusk on many a morning. I'm aware of that. But when I do stop and savor it, and I am present in that moment of eating it, my experience of enjoying that moment is exponentially increased. And it is the same with sex. If we stop rushing through it, if we stop thinking about 101 other things while we're trying to do it, we actually just stop and engage and go, wow, what am I feeling? What am I noticing? It's a very, very different experience that we have as human beings.
I love that. And that's something accessible to us all the time. It's not a big thing. It's something we can start doing.
No, but I'll never look at a rusk in the same way ever again.
That's why I had to know, like, is it dunked in coffee? Like, I need to get the full picture.
Yeah. Context. Very important.
I'll just have like a jar of rusks the next time I see you.
Please do.
It's the way to your heart.
It is really the way to my heart. I'm a very simple being.
I wanted to ask you about within a relationship, whether you feel like you're in a rut or maybe you just committed to working on your relationship and improving it. What are maybe, let's say, the 2 top questions that you can ask your partner, questions that help you to improve your relationship?
Nice is a terrible word. It's such a beautiful question. Your question is so beautiful because it shows the need for intentionality in our relationships. If sex and relationships were easy and they just happened, you and I would not be talking. I would not have a job. I would not have a full practice. I'd not be turning away people. These things are hard. They take work and effort that don't just happen. So the reason why your question is so beautiful is because it really does help us to understand why we need to be intentional in our relationships and why, when we're in a rut or not, we need to be intentional. We need to make effort. So we tend to do this thing for our partners where something's happening for them and we tend to do for them what we would want done for us. So a very classic example and a very classic dynamic is somebody is upset or distressed. So the other person tries to fix it. The other person tries to come up with a solution and make it better. And the person who's upset and distressed doesn't want it to be fixed. They just want to be comforted. So instead of doing what you think your partner wants, it's about asking your partner, what do you need? What can I do for you right now that would be good to support you? But what do you need right now? And we're not always going to know what we need. I think it's a hard question for a lot of us. But asking your partner that question shows your intention and the intentionality around it to meet your partner's needs and not your own. So I think that is the very, very first question I would say. What do you need? I think that a really beautiful question that couples can ask each other at least once a year or twice a year is, looking back over the past 12 months or 6 months or 3 months, what are some things that you think we've really done well at as a couple? And what are some of the things you think you and I need to continue to work on? It's almost like a mini performance review. That's why I speak about it at the end of every year with my couples that I'm working with or on social media is, can you actually have a performance review of your relationship, but both of you, and where you're at, and taking stock. What are we doing really well? Where are we at the moment? Okay, so we're having a lot of fun together at the moment. We're making a lot of plans. We're going out, and that's really enjoyable. Okay, but where do we need to focus our attention a little bit more? Where is lacking a little bit? Okay, well, we haven't spent as much time with our families that we think we should. So maybe that's something we do need to prioritize. Or actually, we keep missing each other physically. Like, we're not really connecting physically. We're like passing ships in the night. We need to prioritize that. I guess it brings me to just a concept that might be helpful for your listeners around connection, disconnection, and reconnection. So this is a cycle that couples will go through continuously in relationships, and you may be in one phase of this for a much longer period than another at one time, and then a shorter period at another time. But we go through this phase of connection, disconnection, and reconnection constantly in our relationships. So whenever a couple comes to me, I can tell you that most of the time they're in the disconnection phase. So the disconnection phase, well, what do we need to do? How do we know we're disconnected? We're constantly on our phones when we're with each other. We hardly talk anymore. We're like passing ships in the night. We aren't physical with one another anymore. Right, okay. Your signs of disconnection are, and I get couples to list them. Right, what do you need to do to reconnect? Okay, well, we need to put our phones away by 7 o'clock every evening. Great. Okay, we need to get a babysitter. Cool. We need to actually prioritize and be intentional about spending time together. Fantastic. We need to schedule time to cuddle in bed and be close and physically intimate. And I don't know if anybody listening will be kind of turning their noses up, but scheduling is one of the best things you can do for yourself. We are in 2022. We all use calendars and diaries on our phones to remind us when we need to be somewhere and do something. I don't know why we don't do it with our sex lives as well. So we need to be doing that as well. So what will help us reconnect in this moment? Because we've gone in through disconnection to reconnection, and thus moving us through to connection. And then once we're in connection, this is going to take work and effort. We're not just going to stay here without doing anything. we do need to be intentional about it. So I was like cheeky in 3 things there that you asked me for 2, but I hope that makes sense.
That was honestly such a beautiful share, and it leads me so perfectly into the second last question that I wanted to ask you, which was, can you share the value of seeking assistance? I'm not even going to say seeking help, seeking assistance, coming to a psychotherapist, not just when we're in that disconnection phase, but doing this as something that is more proactive, doing this because you believe in your relationship. What are the benefits? Why is it not something that you should see as, I think a lot of people feel like, well, if we need to find help, we're in a bad space and we'd rather not be in a bad space, so we'd rather not even go there.
I'll just use a simple analogy. You don't exercise only at the times that you feel gross, right? We know that exercise actually yields the best results when we are consistent with it, and that even when we're feeling great, we've got to keep exercising. So it's that same principle. Our relationships always need work. It doesn't always have to be in the formal sense of therapy, but we always need to be having conversations or planning to do things together that will benefit our relationship and help us refocus our attention onto our relationship. But I work with a lot of people who come to me because they want to enrich their relationship, or they've tried something and they enjoyed it and now they want to expand on it. So people don't just seek out therapy because they're not well, or something's going wrong. They seek it out because they want more, or they want different, or they want to expand. So think of it like exercising. You're not just going to do it when you feel gross and then you're going to get the kind of, the body shape you want and feeling in your body that you want and then stop. You're going to carry on. You're going to be experiencing that consistent progress if you are consistently intentional with it.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I really do hope that a lot of people take action and look for these resources that can help them to improve their relationship. If it's something that you value, it's definitely worth investing time or money or whatever you want to invest into that relationship. So I really hope that people do take that action. And then my closing question, which I ask all my guests, is how do you define living a world-class life?
I'm going to be really boring, actually. My experience of living my best life is when I am doing things that bring me joy, doing things that are empowering and exciting, and being intentional about why I do them. So I have definitely found, as I've gotten older, that being more precious with my own needs and my own time and my relationship and my relationship's needs and my partner's time has been the most valuable thing I can do, and has helped me feel like I'm living that world-class life.
That's so beautiful. And then lastly, where can people find you? How should they connect? Where's the best place to find you?
So Instagram, I'm relatively active on Instagram. It's a love-hate relationship. So I do a lot of sex positive content on Instagram, educative stuff, videos, sharing of information. So that's Sexology with Catriona. Then I have my own podcast called Asking for a Friend, and I'm launching season 4 in a couple of weeks, which will be really exciting. And I discuss on that platform any and every topic relating to sex, intimacy, relationships, well-being, and so on, that we might be a little bit too embarrassed about to ask for ourselves. Then I have online courses that I'm going to be releasing from next month onwards on my website that you can buy, short courses, long courses, both for those who want to learn a little bit more about sex for their relationships personally, those who want to learn how to bring the topic of human sexuality into their workspace from a healthcare perspective. And then I also have a class on a platform called My Mastery, which is South Africa's kind of leading online content platform. And I'm very fortunate to be the expert on sex and intimate connection on that platform. So you can actually buy my course on My Mastery, and I kind of frame it like the sex education that you never had. So that's, I think, where you can find me. I know it's a lot of places, so hopefully somebody is interested in one of those places.
Yeah, I'm glad there's so many, and there's different levels in which people can connect, so they can take it to the point where they feel comfortable. Thank you so much for your time. I feel like I want to right now get you to promise that we'll do it again, just so I have it on record, but I'm not going to do that. But thank you so much. This was really valuable content, and I hope that it helps a lot of people, and I hope to chat to you soon again.
Thanks, Taz. It's been a pleasure.
Bye-bye.